I had the privilege to go through Lyme disease, there's always been a, let's call it conspiracy, which is no longer a conspiracy as we know with everything, about, Borrelia burgdorferi coming from a lab, about all this mess. I don't know what to think about it because since, what happened in 2020, I believe was some sort of, let's call it radiation thing, something that actually made the immune system collapse. And all the toxins that we already have inside of us make, a crash within the system that caused what we call later on chronic Lyme, post, and all that. So, what do you think about it? Is it actually true? Is this what's going on? Is it a bit more sinister than that, even? Because this is, I mean, I don't know what to think about it. The news basically is that declassified documents from, US bioweapon research that basically say that this story has been hiding in plain sight for years, buried in declassified files, forgotten, and suppressed. So, yet the vast majority of Americans and even many Lyme patients never heard the details of it. So, it's not speculation. So, recent breaking news. It's documented history from the CIA records, National Archives, Pentagon documents, and first-hand accounts that have slowly emerged for decades. So the bacterium Borrelia burgdorferi has existed long before modern labs, with ancient evidence in and pre-colonial samples. What changed dramatically was the sudden clustering and rapid geographic spread for human cases beginning in the 1970s around Connecticut, but then around Europe, later on, around everywhere, really, no? So I wonder, especially since most people that have chronic Lyme are in, let's call it developed, if you like. I don't believe that's, a good way to go. That's what they call developed countries. Most people are there. So why is that? Is it the radiation we're exposed to? Is it the combination of toxins that make our immune system crash and then these bacteria and co-infections flare up? What the hell is going on there? Because, I mean, most of us do not remember being bitten by a tick. And then again, the tick story doesn't match with everything and everyone. And then some people are going to say, well, ticks can be so small, like, like a needle and blah, blah. And yeah, that can possibly happen too. But I really believe at this point that most humanity have this bacteria going on as part of the ecosystem. And then when the immune system fails because of, again, radiation, chemtrails, chemicals, toxins, metals, the food we eat, insulin resistance, all this, there is a point of explosion where, yeah, it just crashes badly, especially in women, no? Since we have, many of us, problems with estrogen related issues because, again, toxins, endocrine disruption, and so on. Therefore, the mast cells go nuts, flare, and this kind of inflammatory diseases happen, apart from being and having horrible guts where obviously our immune system is not how it used to be. So in the 1960s, under Project 112, the US military produced massive numbers of infected insect vectors, up to 100 million mosquitoes per month, 5 million fleas per week, at facilities including Fort Detrick. The program's very existence was officially denied until 2000 CBS News investigations forced its acknowledgement. So Operation Mongoose in 1962, so the CIA airdropped infected ticks onto Cuban targets. An operative later described it as the strangest thing he ever did, recounting how he burned all his clothing upon returning due to contamination fears, while his faint son suffered a life-threatening fever and with unknown origin. Then we have the case of Plum Island, Animal Disease Center, located only 13 miles from Old Lyme and managed by the Army Chemical Corps for biological warfare related research from 1952 to 1969, carried out outdoor experiments with disease ticks. I mean, I'm not saying this is the truth. Again, I saw how many times, let's call the conspiracy theory is actually the cover up of something even more sinister, And I believe this is what's happening in this case. Instead of this being the truth, let's say, I believe the truth is far more sinister than this, actually. which all the toxins that we're exposed to, that in purpose they are throwing to us in all sorts of ways, manners. I think it's like a ticking bomb where they knew, I guess, in the 60s or previous, that at some point or another, many of us we're going to have this level of toxicity enough to actually activate all these infections. I believe something like that's what's going on. Let me know in the comments what you think, because this is like full on stuff. But yeah, I'm just telling the story here. So containment breaches were documented. Test animals escaped and mingled with wild deer and migratory birds capable of carrying ticks hundreds of miles along established flyways. Between 1966 and 1969, the military released two, radioactive Lone Star ticks tagged with carbon 14 for tracking along Atlantic bird migration routes to Virginia. Before these experiments, Lone Star ticks were not established north of the Mason-Dixon line, and afterwards population appeared on Long Island after farther north. Tick experts have since stated that such uncontrolled environmental releases would never be approved under today's biosafety standards. So, Willy Burgdorferi, the scientist who identified Borrelia in 1982, had spent much of his career developing tick-borne biological weapons at Fort Detrick and Plum Island. Declassified notes and interviews revealed that in 1970s and early 1980s, he detected a second pathogen called the Swiss agent Rickettsia helvetica in blood samples from early Lyme patients in Connecticut and Long Island. These samples showed very strong serological reactions, yet the finding was deliberately left out on his landmark in 1982 science paper. Papers discovered in his garage after his death, combined with private 2013 recordings, show Burgdorferi admitting he didn't tell everything and alluding to accidental releases and withheld information. Fellow researchers have since called for re-examination of this suppressed co-infection data for better explaining chronic symptoms and persistent treatment failures. The geographic overlap is hard to ignore. Babiosis appeared in Nantucket in 1968. Rocky Mountain spotted fever cases increased on Cape Cod around the same period, and Long Island recorded some of the nation's highest Lyme densities in 1990s, with Plum Island sitting near the center of it all. So, three tick-borne diseases emerging simultaneously in such proximity remains an epidemic, basically it's an anomaly. So these programs were cloaked in secrecy for decades. Official denials continued until investigation journalists and partial declassification period delete open. The same institutional patterns, prolonged classification, resistance to co-infection research, and slow acknowledgement have appeared in other major public health controversies. Hundreds and hundreds of Americans and other people around the world suffer from Lyme related illnesses every year, many with debilitating chronic effects that are frequently, well, more than frequently, they are completely dismissed by everything, by everyone, and save your life however the hell you can, because no one or very few are gonna actually help. So yeah, if even a fraction of this research contributed unintentionally or otherwise to the epidemic scale, the public has a right to know the full story. Should more of the 1950s and 1970s tick biodefense records be fully declassified and independently reviewed? They definitely should. But the trouble is, again, I believe all this has it smells bad. Let's say, sometimes they recently done this with the Jim Carrey story. They told another story because far too many people were realizing that wasn't him, so they had to do all this story about the makeup guy and so on. Well, I believe this is what's happening here. There has to be a little bit of truth into it, but also I believe it's covering up something which is far more sinister happening, especially in the that's called developed world, Europe, America, Australia, blah blah. I haven't seen many other countries have the same amount or same level of what they call chronic Lyme. In fact, they don't even know what it is. They don't even know what it is in places where we are, so many. So just imagine, right? So what's the cover up? What's happening here? I would love to hear what you think about it, because honestly, the tick story alone is not matching what's actually happening to us. It's just not. And the level of suffering, the level of, people ignoring us, the level of, family members, friends, everyone not understanding any of it, the people suffering, the misdiagnosing of this, which is absolutely crazy, especially when people are neuroinflamed, is absolutely insane, and we have to do something about it. But first, we need to understand what's actually going on, because so far we have some theories happening, like with everything else that's happening nowadays, but we don't really know the truth. The only truth is our bodies are no longer in equilibrium. Therefore, we cannot fight the infections that we already have. Whether it was coming from a lab, or we don't know that, right? Um, but the truth is, we need to clean our environments. We need to clean our lifestyles. We need to somehow bring back this balance back, no matter where this came from in the first place. Which honestly, we don't have a clue. But I do not believe that the tick story alone, whether it escaped from a lab or not, is just what's happening here. I believe there's a lot more deeper and far more sinister things happening to us, which I believe are combined with all this radiation, with all these, metals, food, and so on, that they knew, and they prepared us to live these, let's say, explosions at some point or another. Because again, we are basically surrounded, or let's say, our governments are basically not, as we know, are they are not watching for us. They don't really care about our health. In fact, they do believe that we are far too many, and they need to get rid of some of us and also make a profit of it, right? So yeah, what do you think about it? Let me know. Send me a message or comment in the video, and I'll see you next time.